Richard and Karen Wilson seemed like the perfect couple, living in a picturesque home with their two children, Emily and Daniel, in the quiet town of Woodshade. But beneath their polished exterior, a darkness festered, one that would shatter their family and leave the entire community haunted. When Emily vanished without a trace, the search uncovered not only the horrifying secrets buried in the Wilson home, but a sinister truth about the house itself, one that no one could have imagined. The town of Woodshade had always been known for its quiet streets and friendly neighbors, the kind of place where everyone knew each other and crime was a rare occurrence. It was the last place anyone would expect a mystery to unfold. The Wilson family fit right into the picture-perfect image of the town. Richard and Karen Wilson were respected members of the community, and their two children, Emily and her younger brother Daniel, seemed like ordinary kids. Their house on Maple Street was one of the most impressive on the block, a sprawling colonial home with pristine white shutters and a perfectly manicured lawn. But in October 2015, the Wilson family's life and the entire town was thrown into chaos. Emily Wilson, a bright and outgoing 17-year-old, went missing one crisp autumn evening. She had told her parents she was heading to the library to work on a group project, but she never came home. At first, her parents assumed she had stayed out late without telling them, maybe losing track of time. But as the hours stretched into the next morning, panic began to set in. Karen called Emily's friends, who confirmed they hadn't seen her the night before. Her phone went straight to voicemail, and her social media accounts were eerily silent. By the end of the day, the police were involved, and the search for Emily began in earnest. Flyers with her smiling face were distributed around town, and volunteers combed the woods, parks, and back roads. The entire community came together to help, their concern deepening as days turned into weeks with no sign of her. Emily's belongings in her room were untouched, her bed neatly made, her backpack resting by her desk. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. As the investigation unfolded, unsettling details began to surface. Neighbors started talking about strange occurrences they had noticed at the Wilson house, things they had never thought to mention before. One elderly woman who lived next door claimed she often heard loud banging noises late at night, coming from somewhere deep within the house. Another neighbor reported seeing lights flickering in the windows, even when the family wasn't home. A younger couple who lived across the street described a persistent, low humming sound that seemed to emanate from the house at odd hours. The police initially dismissed these reports as unrelated to Emily's disappearance, chalking them up to the heightened emotions of a worried community. But then they discovered something chilling. Woodshade had a dark history that few people talked about. Over the past 10 years, two other teenage girls had disappeared from the same neighborhood, both within a few blocks of the Wilson home. Their cases were never solved, and though both were presumed dead, no bodies were ever found. The connection between the disappearances was impossible to ignore. What had initially seemed like an isolated tragedy now looked like part of a larger, more sinister pattern. As fear spread through the town, suspicion began to settle over the Wilson family. People wondered if the perfect facade of their home hid something much darker. Whatever had happened to Emily, it was clear that the answers were not as far away as they seemed. 3 months after Emily Wilson's disappearance, the case took an unexpected turn. Despite the exhaustive search efforts, no concrete leads had emerged, and hope was beginning to wane. Then, on a cold January morning, a woman walking her dog through the woods stumbled upon something strange. Hidden among the trees, partially obscured by overgrown brush, was a small, weathered shed. Its door hung ajar, revealing a dusty interior filled with random debris, empty cans, old tools, and bits of rotting wood. At first glance, it seemed insignificant, just another forgotten structure in the woods. But as the woman's dog began pawing at the ground inside, something caught her eye, a tattered notebook lying in the corner. She hesitated before picking it up, brushing away the dirt and leaves. Her hands trembled as she opened the cover and saw the name scrawled on the first page, Emily Wilson. The notebook was immediately handed over to the police, who found its contents deeply unsettling. The entries were written in Emily's neat handwriting, but the tone shifted drastically as the pages progressed. What began as innocent musings about her friends and school life soon spiraled into cryptic and fearful passages. Emily wrote about feeling watched, even when she was alone in her own home. She described hearing noises, faint whispers, heavy footsteps, and the sound of something dragging across the floorboards late at night. One entry stood out above the rest. "I don't know if I can keep this secret anymore. The thing in the basement is getting louder, and I'm scared. They say it's just the house settling, but I know it's not. I don't think anyone would believe me if I told them. Sometimes I think it's watching me." The police questioned the Wilson family about the notebook, but their reactions raised more questions than answers. Richard Wilson insisted the entries were the result of Emily's overactive imagination, claiming she was prone to dramatics and often made up stories for attention. Karen, on the other hand, seemed unusually distraught, avoiding eye contact and giving vague, unconvincing responses. Their demeanor set investigators on edge, but without concrete evidence, there was little they could do. The diary entries, combined with the strange reports from neighbors, convinced investigators to take a closer look at the Wilson home. With a search warrant in hand, they descended on the property, meticulously combing through every room. It wasn't until they reached the basement that they uncovered something truly horrifying. Behind a section of the basement wall, investigators found a hidden door, cleverly concealed beneath layers of insulation and wooden paneling. Beyond it was a small, soundproofed room. The walls were covered with bizarre and disturbing drawings, faces twisted in agony, shadowy figures with elongated limbs, and phrases scrawled over and over. "No escape," "It's coming," and "Don't look." The room was cluttered with old furniture and strange objects. But the most chilling discovery was a box of videotapes stacked neatly in the corner. When the tapes were played, they revealed hours of footage filmed inside the hidden room. The recordings showed people, most of them unrecognizable, sitting in the room, visibly terrified, as though being forced to stay there. Then, in the final moments of one tape, Emily appeared on screen, her hands bound and her face streaked with tears. It was now undeniable that Emily had been in that room after her disappearance. The question remained, how had no one in the house noticed? And more disturbingly, was she still alive? The Wilsons denied any knowledge of the room's existence, but the evidence painted a different picture. The secrets buried in that basement were just the beginning of a far darker truth. As news of the discovery in the Wilson basement spread, the small town of Woodshade descended into a state of unease. What had been an inexplicable tragedy now seemed like the tip of an iceberg no one wanted to confront. The revelation of the hidden room, its disturbing contents, and the videotape of Emily shook the community to its core. People began whispering about the Wilson family, wondering how such a nightmare could exist under their roof without their knowledge, or worse, if they had been complicit. But the investigation soon uncovered something even more chilling, the strange history of the house itself. The Wilson House, an imposing colonial structure that had stood on Maple Street for over a century, was not just a neighborhood landmark. It was also tied to a series of eerie events that locals had long dismissed as coincidence or old ghost stories. The earliest records spoke of a fire in the 1920s that had claimed the lives of an entire family who lived there. Subsequent owners reported inexplicable phenomena, doors that wouldn't stay closed, cold drafts in sealed rooms, and the sound of footsteps in the attic when no one was there. By the 1980s, the house had been sold multiple times, each owner moving out within a few years, citing vague reasons like bad luck or a strange feeling they couldn't shake. The most unnerving stories, however, came from the neighbors. An elderly man who had lived across the street for decades recalled seeing strange shadows moving behind the curtains at night, even when the Wilson family was out of town. Another neighbor claimed she often saw figures standing in the windows, figures that didn't resemble anyone in the household. One young couple who had briefly rented a home nearby described a persistent, low humming sound that seemed to come from the Wilson property, sometimes so loud it kept them awake at night. The discoveries reignited an old urban legend that had haunted the town for generations, the Watcher of Maple Street. The story, passed down for decades, spoke of a malevolent force tied to the oldest houses in the area. The Watcher was said to target families, feeding on their fears and compelling them to commit unspeakable acts. Though many dismissed the tale as folklore, some believed it was more than just a story. The connection to the Wilson house, with its history of tragedy and bizarre happenings, seemed impossible to ignore. As police worked to piece together the timeline of Emily's disappearance, they began to see a pattern that extended beyond the Wilson family. The two other teenage girls who had vanished in the past decade, both living within blocks of the Wilson home, were also believed to be connected to the house. Investigators found evidence linking one of the girls to the same abandoned mine near the woods where Emily's diary had been discovered. The mine, long forgotten by most of the town, was rumored to have been a site of occult activity in the early 20th century. Stories of rituals, strange symbols etched into the walls, and unexplained disappearances had given the area a sinister reputation. Now, with the discovery of Emily's diary and the hidden room, investigators began to suspect that the mine might hold more than just local folklore. It could be the key to unraveling the mystery. Despite the growing evidence, the Wilson family maintained their innocence. Richard and Karen claimed they had no knowledge of the hidden room or the videotapes, but their behavior grew increasingly erratic. Karen appeared withdrawn, often staring blankly into space during questioning, while Richard became defensive and short-tempered, insisting that the family was being unfairly targeted. The community, once united in its grief for Emily, began to fracture. Some believed the Wilsons were victims of something supernatural, while others were convinced they were hiding the truth. The Wilson home, once a symbol of suburban perfection, became the focus of a dark fascination, its shadow looming larger than ever over the town. As tensions grew, police prepared to search the abandoned mine, hoping it would provide answers. But for the people of Woodshade, the fear of what they might find, of what had been lurking in their town all along, was almost too much to bear. The breakthrough came when forensic analysis of the hidden room in the Wilson basement revealed tiny traces of soil that didn't match the area around the house. It was a rare type of clay found only near an abandoned mine on the outskirts of town, a location tied to old Woodshade folklore and whispers of dark rituals. Investigators seized on the lead, organizing a search team to explore the mine, a place long avoided by locals due to its eerie reputation. The mine was a sprawling, claustrophobic labyrinth of tunnels, many of which had partially collapsed over the years. Flashlights illuminated jagged walls covered in faded graffiti, strange symbols, and remnants of what might have once been ceremonial carvings. As they ventured deeper, the air grew colder, and the sense of unease among the search team was palpable. It didn't take long before they stumbled upon the first horrifying discovery. Scattered throughout a large chamber were personal belongings that matched the descriptions of items reported missing, along with the two other teenage girls from years earlier. Backpacks, bracelets, a pair of glasses, all eerily preserved, as though someone had carefully placed them there. But it was what lay further inside the chamber that sent shockwaves through the investigation. Tucked into a dark corner was a pile of skeletal remains. Forensic experts later confirmed that the bones belonged to the two missing girls from the past decade. Their positioning suggested they had been left there deliberately, as though discarded. The atmosphere in the mine turned even darker as the search party pressed on, desperate to find clues about Emily Wilson. Then, in a smaller, narrower tunnel branching off from the main chamber, they made another chilling discovery. A journal, much like the one found in the woods, was lying on the ground. This one, however, was different. It appeared to belong to Richard Wilson. The entries were written in a frantic, almost illegible scrawl, detailing strange visions and compulsions. Richard described hearing voices emanating from the walls of his home and feeling as though he was being watched constantly. One passage stood out. "I don't want to do it, but I have no choice. It's the house. It demands sacrifices. If I don't obey, it will take everything from me." The Watcher is real. The journal entries revealed a descent into madness, but they also implicated Richard in the disappearances. It was clear he believed he was acting under the influence of something far beyond his control. The investigators' relief at finally having evidence to connect Richard to the crimes was tempered by the realization that Emily still hadn't been found. As they pushed deeper into the mine, the tunnel narrowed until it ended abruptly at a sealed opening. The soil here was freshly disturbed, and investigators dug frantically, fearing the worst. What they uncovered wasn't a body, but a crude wooden box containing a collection of videotapes, all labeled with dates spanning years. When the tapes were examined, they revealed horrifying footage of the hidden room in the Wilson basement. Some of the recordings predated the Wilson family's move into the house, showing other individuals, teenagers and adults alike, bound and terrified, often screaming or crying. One chilling tape, dated weeks after Emily's disappearance, showed her sitting in the chair, her face pale and her body trembling. Behind her, a shadowy figure loomed, indistinct but undeniably human. DNA analysis of the mine and the tapes revealed something even more shocking. Richard wasn't acting alone. Fingerprints in the hidden room and the mine matched those of Karen Wilson, Emily's mother. When confronted, Karen broke down and confessed, revealing the dark truth about what had been happening in their home. She claimed that Richard had become obsessed with the idea of appeasing the house after moving in, insisting that the voices and shadows were real. He believed the watcher required offerings to keep the family safe. Karen admitted to helping him cover up the crimes, fearing for her own life and that of their son, Daniel. But her confession raised even more questions. Was this truly the work of a delusional mind, or was there something more sinister at play? With Richard and Karen in custody, the case seemed to be nearing its conclusion, but the fate of Emily remained uncertain. Investigators combed the mine and the surrounding area for weeks, but found no further traces of her. For the town of Woodshade, the revelations were almost too horrific to comprehend. The Wilson family had been hiding unthinkable secrets, but the unanswered questions about Emily left a dark cloud hanging over the case. With Richard and Karen Wilson in custody, the town of Woodshade finally exhaled. The truth about the horrors that had occurred within the walls of their seemingly perfect home had been exposed, and the fear that had gripped the community began to subside. Yet, for all the answers uncovered, one devastating mystery remained: the fate of Emily Wilson. Despite exhaustive searches of the mine and surrounding areas, no trace of Emily was ever found. Investigators pored over the videotapes recovered from the mine, but none showed what had ultimately happened to her. The last footage of Emily showed her alive in the hidden room, pale and trembling, as a shadowy figure loomed behind her. But beyond that, the trail went cold. The lack of closure haunted both the investigators and the community. The Wilson house was seized as part of the ongoing investigation and declared uninhabitable. Over time, the property became a local legend, a symbol of the darkness that had unfolded there. The once pristine exterior began to decay, weeds overtaking the once manicured lawn, the windows boarded up to keep out vandals. People crossed to the other side of the street rather than walk past it. For the residents of Woodshade, the house had become a tangible reminder of the unimaginable horrors that had taken place within. But the case refused to stay buried. A year after Richard and Karen's arrests, the house was sold at auction to a young couple from out of town, unaware of its grisly history. Their plan was to renovate the property, unaware of the whispers in the community warning them to stay away. As they began tearing out old walls and ripping up floorboards, they uncovered new secrets hidden within the house. In the basement, behind a section of drywall that investigators had overlooked, the couple found a small crawl space. Inside was a locked, rusted trunk covered in dust and cobwebs. When they managed to pry it open, they discovered a collection of Emily's personal belongings: a pair of shoes, a diary, and a Polaroid camera. Most chilling, however, was a single photograph that appeared to have been taken recently. The photo showed Emily alive, her face pale, and her eyes wide with terror. She was holding a piece of paper with a handwritten message: "I'm still here." The discovery reignited the case, but it also deepened the mystery. Forensic analysis of the photograph revealed it had been taken within the last 6 months, long after Emily's disappearance. The handwriting on the note matched hers, but the investigators couldn't determine where or how the photo had been taken. The Polaroid sent shockwaves through Woodshade, reigniting fears that whatever darkness had consumed the Wilson family wasn't gone. Some residents claimed to hear strange noises coming from the house late at night. Even after the new owners moved out, unable to handle the oppressive atmosphere. Others swore they saw flickering lights in the windows or shadowy figures moving inside, though the house remained empty. As the months wore on, rumors about the Watcher of Maple Street resurfaced. Some believed Emily was still alive, trapped somewhere by the same malevolent force that had driven Richard to madness. Others feared she had become part of the house itself, a ghost tethered to its cursed foundation. Despite renewed efforts, investigators could find no leads. The house was sealed once again, and no one dared to step inside. Emily's Polaroid became the final haunting image of her case, a lingering reminder that while the Wilsons' crimes had been uncovered, the true source of the evil that plagued their home had never been fully explained. To this day, the house on Maple Street stands as a chilling monument to the horrors that unfolded within. Few dare to walk near it, and those who do often report an overwhelming sense of unease. Some say they hear faint whispers carried on the wind, or see a fleeting glimpse of a girl standing in the upstairs window, staring out as if waiting for someone to find her. For the people of Woodshade, the story of Emily Wilson remains an open wound, a question that will likely never be answered. Whether it was the work of human hands or something far darker, one thing remains certain. There were monstrous things going on in that house, and their shadow still lingers.